For 85 minutes on that fateful Wednesday night, millions of England football fans truly lived inside an extraordinary dream. They had all but reached out and brushed their trembling fingers against a ticket to their first World Cup final in 60 years of weary waiting. Just 5 minutes left. 5 short minutes spinning on the clock to bury forever the ghosts of failure, the bitter tears, and the ridicule that had haunted an entire nation since the summer of 1966. In the stands, songs of glory had already begun to rise. Smiles had already broken across tens of thousands of faces. And then, like a cruel and horribly familiar fate, in the space of just 7 brutal final minutes, all that brilliant hope exploded into a million pieces. Every psychological scar English football had gritted its teeth through for 6 long decades tore open again and bled out right there on the green turf. So what actually happened to them in that moment? Was that horrifying collapse merely a tactical accident? Or, deeper down, was it the most predictable mass psychological crisis in the entire history of the World Cup? To answer that properly, we have to dig back into the darkest chapters of history. England and Argentina never, ever produce an ordinary match on the pitch. This is one of the deepest, darkest, and most bitter rivalries in the history of world football, rooted in the real-world tensions of the Falklands War, running through Diego Maradona's Hand of God goal in 1986, and once erupting violently with David Beckham's fateful red card in 1998. From the very first seconds, Wednesday night's match was an intense, life-or-death battle, evidenced by 19 vicious fouls recorded in the first half alone. But to truly understand the root cause of Wednesday's disaster, looking only at what happened on the pitch isn't enough. You have to look deep into the psychological DNA of English football. The numbers don't lie. Since 1966, England's national team has lost 7 of 8 World Cup knockout matches against higher-ranked opponents. They've taken the lead in a semifinal and thrown it all away, not once, but twice. They even led in a European Championship final on home soil and still went down on penalties. A pattern repeating this precisely can't be random bad luck. And this is certainly not a purely tactical or technical problem. This is what clinical psychologists call collective trauma. Memory, an invisible wound that sits like a time bomb buried in the subconscious. When the brain detects danger signals resembling the past, painful memories from earlier generations awaken automatically, flood the mind, and choke out the reasoning of the players sweating on the pitch in the present. Right now, if you scroll through social media or the biggest sports papers in England, outrage is engulfing the entire British press. They're tearing through every corner, screaming across the front pages to find a villain for their tragic story. They're calling this match a scandal, a rotten conspiracy in which FIFA handed the whistle for the tournament's most explosive, most hostile fixture to a referee notorious for being reluctant to show cards. Thousands of comments, hundreds of analysis pieces dissecting every whistle and every slow-motion replay to prove England were robbed outright. But through the lens of behavioral psychology and psychoanalysis, we call this entire reaction a defense mechanism of the brain specifically. Projection and blame shifting? When the pain and disappointment of defeat overwhelm the nervous system. When reality collides violently with the belief that football was coming home, the brain automatically triggers an emergency defense. It hunts for an external scapegoat to carry all the guilt. Dumping all that anger and heartbreak onto the referee or FIFA is the easiest, safest route for the English to avoid confronting the painful, systemic truth inside their own football culture. The brain always takes the path of least resistance. The referee may have made a few debatable calls. He may have gotten a couple of specific situations wrong. But the blunt truth is that referee wasn't the one who paralyzed those legs, choked those lungs, or stole the courage of the 3 lions in that life-or-death moment. The real brutal turning point of the match had nothing to do with any wrongful whistle or a card pulled out of nowhere. It came at the 75th minute, when head coach Thomas Tuchel decided to pull off his only goal scorer and bring on a third center back with 15 minutes of regulation time still to play. He did far more than make a tactical substitution. The cold post-match statistics reveal a terrifying truth. From that substitution until the final whistle, England held possession for just 12% of the remaining time. I'll say that again, a mere 12%. You cannot invite an elite collective led by a genius like Lionel Messi to lay siege to your own penalty box for half an hour and naively hope to walk away unscathed. That was, plainly, tactical suicide. But the darker, deeper truth lives in the layers of neuroscience. Pulling the defensive line back so passively inadvertently triggered an extremely dangerous psychological phenomenon known as prevent defense focus syndrome. Thomas Tuchel's brain, just like the brain of every England manager before him who has faced this same life-or-death threshold, was suddenly overwhelmed by an invisible fear. His nervous system flipped from how do we win and finish this match to how do we not throw away the lead and not lose this match. When the leader's brain enters prevention mode, the amygdala fires off continuous danger signals. That panic instantly spreads to the players on the pitch, flooding their adrenal glands with a surge of the stress hormone cortisol. That toxic chemical flood produces devastating physiological consequences. Muscles seize up, losing their usual fluidity. Peripheral vision narrows sharply so players can see only the ball and not the space around them. And, critically, information processing speed in the prefrontal cortex and the accuracy of split-second decision-making drop by as much as 30%. Tuchel didn't simply park a double-decker bus in front of goal to protect the score line. He personally injected his players' minds with a neurochemical cocktail that guaranteed a total collapse from within. But why did England's surging cortisol, ragged breathing, and tunnel vision become an irreversible death sentence? Because right there on that green turf, standing in front of them, was a creature nature had engineered to sniff out, hunt down, and exploit exactly that kind of extreme panic. That name is Lionel Messi. The world's media loves to praise Messi with flowery phrases, a born genius, a gift from God, but sports psychologists and neuroscientists see him through a very different lens. In life-or-death moments, when pressure swells to its absolute peak, the natural human survival instinct is to trigger fight or flight. Players speed up, scramble frantically, burn energy pointlessly, and react rashly. But watch how Messi played in those final minutes. He did the exact opposite of what instinct demands. He deliberately slowed down. He strolled, almost leisurely, through the thick of the opposing defense. This was absolutely not laziness or physical exhaustion. It's a masterful psychological mechanism Messi's brain uses to handle cognitive overload. While England's defenders drowned in an overwhelming flood of information, their brains too overloaded to process any more data. Messi kept turning his head, scanning the space with his eyes to gather information calmly, mentally carving the pitch into a grid of coordinates. As the England defenders' peripheral vision narrowed into a tight tunnel from the cortisol surge, seeing only the ball and not the runners around it, Messi ruthlessly exploited those deadly blind spots. Messi himself has said he began working intensively with a mental performance coach back in 2019, preparing for exactly these moments. That psychologist helped him master a rare cognitive state known as micro-level emotional self-regulation. Despite the crushing pressure from the stands, his heart rate stayed as still as an autumn lake. While Tuchel kept infecting his players with fear, Messi quietly slipped into a flow state, that supreme mental zone where time around him seems to slow. All the noise disappears, and every decision is made at a flawless subconscious level. England had built their own psychological prison and locked themselves inside it. and Messi was simply the only one holding the key to turn the lock and finish them off. Now shift the lens and compare England's panic and paralysis with how Argentina's collective operates on the pitch. If you followed this tournament closely, you'll notice something remarkable. This South American side has conceded the opening goal and fallen behind in 3 consecutive knockout matches. Falling behind in a knockout game is always a scythe hanging over any team's psyche. Yet Argentina came back to win all 3 of those brutal matches. Coming back once could be called luck. Coming back 3 times in a row against the world's best opponents cannot possibly be explained by luck. It's overwhelming proof of a collective with a bottomless well of battle-tested experience and an almost ice-cold composure. In sports psychology, we call this phenomenon psychological resilience. And remember, resilience is absolutely not an innate personality trait. This remarkable capacity is the result of a relentless, scientific, and deliberate long-term training process. Argentina's squad has been systematically prepared on the mental side. Head coach Lionel understands the importance of sports psychology so deeply that he insisted on bringing in a full-time sports psychologist to work with the squad right after the 2022 World Cup ended. When they concede and fall behind, instead of treating it as a life-or-death threat that freezes the body, the way England's players do, the brains of Argentina's players treat it as a challenge to overcome, a signal to trigger their highest level of focus. The difference lies in how the brain assigns meaning to adversity. While the English players' brains are flooded with fear, the Argentine collective's nervous system runs on an entirely different operating system, a lethal calm born from deliberate psychological conditioning. They've learned to treat pressure as a privilege rather than a burden. And here is the most genuinely haunting part, the sharpest piece of evidence for an endless nightmare loop in English football. Across the entire multi-decade history of the World Cup, spanning hundreds of teams and thousands of matches, there have been exactly 2 occasions where a team took the lead in a semifinal and then collapsed to lose. And bitterly enough, both of those rare, tragic occasions belong to the England national team. This is absolutely not harmless coincidence. It's a rigid psychological pattern that behavioral science could have predicted with precision before the ball was even kicked. Look back at recent history. England had a dream start when they led Croatia in the 2018 semifinal, only to lose their grip the moment the pressure mounted and go down to defeat. They scored early and led Italy in the Euro 2020 final on home soil, only to lock themselves inside their own fear and ultimately collapse in agony. And now, that same brutal script has repeated itself almost to the letter. They led their old rivals Argentina in 2026, held gold in their hands for 85 minutes, and still collapsed in the final 7 minutes. 3 different managers, 3 different generations of players. Yet one thing has never changed. The final outcome, eerily identical every single time. This is precisely what experts define as a systemic psychological ceiling. The individuals on the pitch may change, but the psychological structure of the collective remains permanently trapped in the mire of the past. Until the English Football Federation finds the courage to build a genuine team of psychological transformation experts capable of intervening at the deepest layer of players' subconscious. The faces wearing the 3 lions will keep changing, but their sad ending will never be rewritten. So, after all these lenses of analysis from history to neuroscience, what is the final truth behind England's disaster? Were England truly robbed of victory by a short-sighted referee? Were they betrayed by their own manager's cowardice and miscalculation? Or were they simply beaten by a better, more resilient side on the other side of the pitch? Or, if we're brave enough to look at the deepest core of the issue, stripping away every outer layer, were they, in fact, beaten by 60 years of collective trauma that was never properly resolved? That invisible wound sits like a dormant volcano, always ready to erupt, paralyzing minds and destroying every achievement at the exact moment the golden trophy comes into sharpest view. Are we judging a purely footballing failure? Or is its true core a devastating, total failure of neuroscience and psychology cleverly dressed in the glossy jersey of the beautiful game to fool the eyes of fans everywhere? Having laid out this evidence and analysis, I've arrived at a clear and firm answer of my own. But the point of this video isn't just for me to state my conclusion. I genuinely want to hear yours. I want to read your counterpoints, your perspectives, your own analysis. Drop your thoughts, your arguments, and even your anger in the comments below, so we can dissect this down to the bone together. And if this video gave you a fresh, deeper way of seeing things, don't forget to subscribe to The Silent Pitch. Here, we don't just replay pretty goals for you. We put this sport on an invisible operating table, pick up the scalpel, and dissect the minds of the people who created. Stay with us, because the classic final coming up between two footballing giants, Argentina and Spain, is shaping up to become a true monster of a match. There will be scheming and ruthless psychological warfare to come, and trust me, the merciless mental battle for that final has already, quite officially, been lit right now.